Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this panel. My name is Diana Chaplin. I will be your moderator today. I am the Canopy Director of One Tree Planted, which is a forest-friendly way of saying that I manage our communications, our project storytelling, and some of our partnerships. And for those that are not familiar, One Tree Planted is a global 501c3 nonprofit. We plant trees all around the world with an emphasis on biodiversity and local communities. In 2020 alone, we planted over 10 million trees in 28 countries across over 100 projects. So that just gives you kind of a sense of the scale in terms of what we're working with. So I'm just going to set the stage in terms of what we're going to cover in today's panel, and then I'll turn it over to the rest of the panel for introductions. So we're talking about results-based financing for natural climate solutions. We're going to cover what impact-based investing looks like, how it actually works, really diving into the mechanics of that. We're going to talk about how we can scale reforestation and forest restoration globally and making sure we do that the right way. Of course, we're going to talk about metrics and reporting, some of those essential pieces that we need to track the project's success and the long-term impact. And we're going to talk about what I think is kind of the fun part and what we all love about this work, which is how do we turn all of that interest, passion, and capital into real action for the environment. So with that, I would like to turn it over to the panel, and we'll do introductions one by one, starting with Bill.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. This has just been an incredible 2 days, and thanks so much for the opportunity and for your commitment of time and passion to the work. So as Diana said, I'm Bill Toomey. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at One Tree Planted, and I have over 30 years of experience in the nonprofit conservation space, mostly in forestry, tree planting, and community-based work. So I've been in this position for about 7 months, and it's been an incredible journey with One Tree Planted. And we, as Diana mentioned, are a global tree planting and reforestation nonprofit, and looking forward to talking with you more, answering your questions, and helping translate some of the themes that we're hearing over the course of the last couple of days into action. And just to highlight some of the things that I've noticed in the very high quality sessions that I've participated in, is that there is huge global interest in this work, and that we need to take action now. While it's great that there's a lot of commitments being made at the government and country level, we're all kind of struggling with how to make those commitments real and how to take that action now. And I think what you'll hear over the course of the next hour or so is some approaches that we're taking here at One Tree Planted in partnership with WRI and NPX to put together an actionable portfolio of high quality on the ground projects to translate your interest and commitment into action.
Thanks, Bill. Lindsay?
Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay Crumbaugh, and I am the director at NPX. NPX stands for Nonprofit Exchange, and we are an organization that is transforming the way that impact is funded by explicitly linking capital to results. I came to NPX really through two different career paths. I started off in investing. I worked at private equity in a shop where we invested both mezzanine and equity. And then I switched completely to my other career path, which was in the nonprofit sector, where I worked in Africa in health system strengthening, and then the US in workforce development. And I give you this background because those two diverse roles really gave me perspective into some of the challenges really with fundraising around nonprofits and impact more broadly speaking. And so what I saw in my role in the nonprofit space was funding was often insufficient. It was often short-term in nature, and it was often activities driven as opposed to results based. Whereas in my role in private equity, we're often making long-term investments in corporations over 5 to 7 year time horizon, with the expectation that the company really knew how to drive the results and knew what activities and operations needed to take effect in order to achieve our goal, which in this case was a financial return. And so I left the nonprofit space really in search of a way to kind of find how do we create these efficiencies in the impact sector that I've seen in the private sector around in the private equity space. And so joined MPX, where my role really is to help create this level of transparency and efficiency for impact. And we do this through results-based financing, which we'll get into in a lot more detail. But really, the model we have created really serves three stakeholders. One is the NGO or the implementer who is executing impact so they can access long-term capital. The second is the donors who are really hungry for transparency and can get transparency and donate towards results through this model. And then the third is investors who are seeking a financial return, a social return, environmental return, which can be generated through a results-based model in a really efficient market. So excited to talk to you all today about this more. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Aaron?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Bill and Diana, for kicking us off. My name is Aaron Minnick. I'm a senior manager here at World Resources Institute and lead our work with the TerraMatch platform, as well as WRI's engagement with MasterCard's Prices Planet Coalition. For those who don't know, WRI is a global environmental nonprofit that really works at sort of the intersection of environment, these global environmental and global challenges, and the human environment, social well-being, and really how can we achieve both at the same time. I've been at WRI now for a little over 11 years, a bit of a lifer. In a number of different capacities, but I've been working with our Global Restoration Initiative for about 8 of those years. Previously, I led most of our engagement in Kenya, leading a multi-stakeholder coalition to do a national level mapping of where restoration opportunities are in the country and helping to inform the national government commitment that they ended up making to the bond challenge in AFR 100. Through that role, I had lots of opportunities to go out into the field and sort of meet with those local groups that are actually doing the real work on the ground and seeing some of the challenges with how you have this amazing network of groups out there that have been doing this work for years and decades, but internationally are sort of invisible and have a really hard time tapping into the different sources of funding and financing that exist, and started to see this sort of disconnect between we all of this demand that we had for restoration, reforestation, and all these groups doing the work, and why can't they find each other and connect? And that sort of led into my work the last 3 or so years ago, working to build out what has become the WRI's TerraMatch platform, which is really sort of an online marketplace matchmaking platform for the restoration space to help connect these small and medium-sized NGOs and businesses that are engaged in the restoration sector, and allow them to give them some visibility and allow them to sort of connect with this global community. I think during this entire process, we've engaged a lot and partnered a lot with One Tree Planted, and really learned sort of all of the nuts and bolts from speaking with corporations and investors and understanding the realities on the ground, and really how do we sort of improve this process so we can reach some efficiencies.
Thanks, Aaron. Venkat?
Good morning or evening or wherever you are. This is a global conference, and Aaron made my life a little bit easier. I'm also part of WRI, so I won't get into that, but I'm the manager of restoration finance at the Global Restoration Initiative, and a little bit more about the Global Restoration Initiative because I think it's important for context. I think what we like to say is we have 3 pillars. We inform, we enable, and we invest. So we inform stakeholders and governments the importance of restoration, the business side of it. We enable, we have a policy accelerator, we work with civic society, we actually get a chance to work with on the ground people that give them technical capacity to actually implement restoration, and the invest side, which is what Aaron and I are part of, which is actually enabling financing to get down to local enterprises or project developers to really flow restoration at scale, which is what we really want to do with the GRI. So a little bit more personally about me, I've not been at WRI for 11 years like Aaron. I've been here for about 9 weeks. I recently joined, but my background is a little bit different than most. I was a pro tennis player for a while, and then after traveling the world with pro tennis, I realized that conservation economics and resource economics is just as cool. So I joined a bunch of organizations like the UN and the Wildlife Conservation Society, doing a lot of deals on the ground, payment for ecosystem service work, forestry management, working with energy companies to facilitate environmental watershed programs. So I was doing that in a bunch of developing countries, and I joined WRI a little while back. And I'm excited to talk to you all to share at least my perspective from the field side on making a deal in restoration. And this is a really cool panel. Lindsay, Bill, Aaron, and Diana really know what they're talking about. So I hope you guys are listening carefully, because this is going to be fun.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, and as everyone can see, we have several different organizations represented here, but what brings us all here, I think, is what draws us all to the summit overall, which is really the shared mission of nature-based restoration. For all of us, it's reforestation, and partnerships are really key. One Tree Planted has been working with WRI since 2018, I believe. So we already have a track record of success. We've already gotten a lot of trees in the ground, and now we're poised to really take that to the next level. We really are stronger together. So with that, Bill, I invite you to kind of, share with us, sort of set the stage, the landscape, if you will, of when we're looking at this challenge of global restoration at scale. What are some of those detailed challenges, some of those opportunities in terms of how we can approach this to not only implement reforestation at scale, but to do it in a way that takes biodiversity and communities and all of that into account to make sure it's done the right way.
Great, thanks, Diana. Yeah, so I think the stage is set, and we have a strong foundation to build upon. I mean, our work with WRI over the years has created a portfolio of high quality on the ground tree planting and forest restoration opportunities. And what I've heard over the last couple of days is there's huge interest right at the country and corporate level for moving forward with big, ambitious net zero and climate goals. And where I think the the challenge and the opportunity is directing that interest to high quality on the ground projects where we can do this work at the scale that we need to and provide all the benefits that this work delivers for people and communities, as well as biodiversity and the planet. So what I've been hearing is that the disconnect here is, or the opportunity or the challenge is that taking that huge global interest, and there's a huge amount of capital represented in the attendees here, and how to direct that appropriately and efficiently to on the ground projects where we can see the impact and the results being delivered at the pace and scale that we need to. So, we're just one organization, and we have, I think, some big things to contribute in the space, but we're just scratching the surface of potential, I feel. I think, and we can get into this in more detail, if we can be successful at connecting that global interest, the corporate interest, government interest, in connecting them to, as Aaron was saying, these really high quality on the ground partnerships that are doing amazing work in community that people just might not be aware of. So what we're trying to do in partnership with WRI is kind of be this one-stop shop, so to speak, or your natural-based solutions kind of go-to partner to really cut through all that all those challenges of how do you connect with these groups on the ground to direct your resources. We're trying to make it easy for you in developing this portfolio of projects that we have built over the years. And where we are with that, Diana, is we have, again, a really solid foundation, but what's missing is kind of long-term commitments of capital to really get these projects to a place where they can scale to the degree that we all need them to and want them to. So if we can start to move from these great conversations we've had over the last couple of days to taking some of those commitments and some of that capital and directing them to projects and making those commitments multi-year and substantial, we can in turn make those investments in our partners on the ground to make sure that they are able to scale to the degree that we need them, and that the trees that we're going to be planted are available, and the quality of those plantings, the associated metrics and monitoring are all in place, and the organizations on the ground have additional support and capacity to scale at the rate and pace that we need them to.
Well, that's a great segue to the investment piece, right? That's kind of what brings us all together here, and that's Lindsay's expertise with NPX. So can you, Lindsay, define for us what is impact-based investment? What does that look like? How does it work? How does it affect the nonprofit, the returns to investment? Can you get into a little bit of those details for us?
Yeah, sure. And maybe I'll start off by giving some context on the problem that we're solving at MPX, which really actually applies to almost all kind of impact-driven spaces. Essentially, we're working with three key stakeholders, as I mentioned. The first is the NGO or the implementer who's trying to achieve impact, but oftentimes, as Bill mentioned, really does not have access to flexible long-term capital. But that's really what's needed to unlock impact at scale. The second is donors or corporations who are making donations, for example, who really have significant capital to deploy, but are looking for where can they get sort of the best return on their philanthropic dollar, if you will. So how do I deploy capital in a way that creates the most impact, and I know that I'm making a difference? And then the third stakeholder is the impact investors. So we have heard from a number of impact investors who say, I really want to invest in something that I know is having an impact, and I don't want to sort of participate in kind of this impact washing that some of the sector has been sort of accused of. And so those are the three stakeholders. And if you kind of distill what the kind of key issues is, it's the kind of disconnect between the capital and the impact. And so MPX has created a results-based financing model to explicitly connect the two of them, so there is no disconnect. And the way that we do this, and I'll get into the nuts and bolts here a little bit if you allow me, is through two vehicles. One is a donation vehicle, which is a pool of donor capital that donates only based on results and not based on activities. And then the second is an investment vehicle in which investors provide risk capital with the expectation of a financial return as well as a social and environmental return. And the way that this works is essentially these two vehicles are connected. They're not disconnected at all. And I'll sort of walk through the flow of how this works just to kind of pull it all together. So we start off with this investment vehicle. We secure investment dollars to deploy towards these kind of high quality projects that Bill referenced, let's say through One Tree Planted. One Tree Planted takes those investment dollars and puts them to work, achieving specific impact metrics that we align upon upfront. As impact is achieved, the donor vehicle with the donor funds actually pays for One Tree Planted's impact. And then One Tree Planted repays the investors. So let me tie that all together. Impact investors put in the upfront risk capital. As One Tree Planted deploys that capital and achieves results, donors fund One Tree Planted repays the investors. And ultimately what this does is impact investors achieve a return based on impact. Those two are not mutually exclusive. They are completely tied together. Donors only donate to One Tree Planted as One Tree Planted achieves impact. So donors only pay for impact. And One Tree Planted actually has long-term capital and the ability to essentially elevate the impact that they are achieving as an organization. So that's essentially how it works. And I certainly can get into a lot more details, but wanted to just maybe point out one kind of specific thing about this model that's really, really unique and is often sort of mind-bending, which is that this vehicle allows investors to actually invest in a nonprofit and to invest in a nonprofit without taking on any sort of credit risk associated with the nonprofit not being able to repay based on their financials, because essentially they're paying based on their performance and their impact that's being achieved. So it's essentially a new channel, a new avenue for investors to put money into nonprofits that hasn't really been available historically. And maybe just to summarize and wrap this all together, as Bill mentioned, there's sort of a lot of discussion and engagement and excitement around this space, broadly speaking, and we're really trying to put this work into action alongside One Tree Planted, as well as a collaboration with WRI through a $100 million fund that would support these high quality projects that exist, that Aaron referenced, that need capital to scale, that have proven operations. And we're looking to do this through this results-based vehicle that will allow the transparency of metrics results to become apparent to all three parties through an aligned incentive structure. So we can dive into that more as we continue, but we are really putting this into action and are excited for engagement and collaboration from this community to participate in this type of structure so we can support greater and faster and better climate solutions that we all know are needed.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I will say that what Lindsay's describing here is really helpfully illustrated through some of the visuals that you have and some of the materials you have, Lindsay. So I definitely invite folks who really want to kind of get to know more about this to connect with us after the panel, because I know I've seen some diagrams that really help to explain this in a little bit more detail. So I'd love to turn it over to Venkat now, because, you know, other than your legendary tennis playing career, which I'm just learning about in this panel, you know, you've also done a lot and explored a lot in terms of kind of applying a similar model in terms of funding enterprise strategies when it comes to all of these networks that are happening on the ground through TerraMatch and WRI. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you see this partnership as having the potential to scale this approach, right? Because ultimately the impact, One Tree Planted and WRI are then working on that impact very closely. So elaborate on that a little bit, Venkat.
Sure. I would also mention that my tennis career was distinctly unlegendary. So I don't know about the capital L word there, but it was a lot of fun. In terms of the partnership, I think Lindsay's model, I actually first heard about it only about a month or two back, and it's a fascinating approach. I think it's, yeah, I mean, one of the questions is asking, it is similar to development impact bond to some degree. I think Lindsay can elaborate more on it in terms of what the actual structure looks like regarding payment and financing. But in terms of our partnership with One Tree Planted and what WRI can do, I think personally, from my standpoint, at least we like to say, at least we like to pride ourselves to WRI and really delivering impact-based results. And I know OTP thinks the exact same way. So I think what the problem that we're seeing, at least, and Aaron will go in a second so you can tell more about TerraMatch, but we have a lot of project developers. We spent a lot of time developing a very, very neat digital platform that is very, very strong fundamentally on spatial analyses, monitoring, really showcasing the impact of what a project developer can do on the ground. But I think one of the problems we've been having is certainly getting that match in terms of getting that funding from a donor or a corporation or whoever it may be to get it down to the ground. I mean, we have extensive vetting protocols to make sure that our developers on the ground are doing their work and we can monitor them safely. So we've kind of de-risked the sector a little bit, but all that back floor, whatever you want to call it, work. But I think the next step is to absolutely do something akin to the likes of what Lindsay's suggesting and what we all want to do, which is kind of create a large fund to make sure that we can get the funding down to the field in an effective manner, reduce the transaction costs, because ideally, I suspect for a lot of donors and corporations or whoever want to get money down to the field, there's a significant amount of middlemen / other avenues they got to stick around with along the way to get the money down to the field. And one of the nice parts about TerraMatch and one of the nice parts about this partnership is that it really reduces a lot of that from a donor side point of view. I think there's there's obviously, it's always going to be some sort of risk in any particular project, but I think that the reputational risk kind of goes reduced, or at least gets pretty significantly on my side with WRI and OTP and NPX. But I would just like to, in general, that's a little bit of a ramble, and Aaron will continue on TerraMatch side, but I just think that this is the kind of partnership that really makes sense. At least it's a win-win for all sides, at least the way I see it.
Yeah, thanks, Venkat. Yeah, I think just to follow on that, I think what we've, as Bill was saying, there's been this huge increase over the last 2-3 years of interest from the corporate sector, especially in net zero investments and NBS. We've seen all of these commitments coming from governments. I was mentioning Bond Challenge, AFR 100, 20 by 20, and it's all sort of coming to a head. And if we, in the past, I think the demand has been low enough that you can sort of have, there's a handful of key big players globally that sort of like help it with this type of transaction. And they've been able to sort of meet demand. And not saying anything bad about them, but if the demand that we're seeing piling up actually starts investing this capital, very quickly those major players are going to be maxed out. And the only way we're going to actually be able to meet that demand and meet these global, global challenges that we're facing is we're going to need to grow the size of this tent, the size of this community. And as I said, that's not going to be a handful of larger players. This is going to be lots and lots of small and medium-sized NGOs and businesses around the world. And that can bring with it, I mean, a lot of excitement, so many different stories. These groups are very much embedded in their communities and really know what is needed, not just from a global standpoint focused on carbon, but what are the issues with soil erosion or food security or incomes, and really sort of like, hitting multiple benefits through these projects. On the flip side, the challenge here is having lots of smaller players does increase transaction costs, and it does increase, or at least the perceived risk of investing and working with these groups. And I think part of what's exciting with this partnership and what we've proven over the last couple years with our work with One Tree Planted is that WRI's work through its global offices and its involvement in these international platforms, we're able to do a more thorough sort of vetting and due diligence process for the groups that come through both our Land Accelerator platform, which are focused on SMEs and entrepreneurs, and through TerraMatch, which at this stage is focused primarily on the NGO sector. And so that initial review process helps reduce risk a little bit there. We also review all of the projects that come through to make sure that they're sort of meeting these best in class standards. And I think the role too that we're able to do is through a group like One Tree Planted. And I was going to mention this later on, but I think the restoration sector is missing some of this sort of aggregation. And I think one of the roles that One Tree Planted does very well is be able to pick up lots of these smaller projects or small to medium NGOs, but be able to bring them together and package them in a way that on the investor side, you basically are coming in and you can invest larger amounts in the sector, and having One Tree Planted sort of play that aggregator role to get those dollars to those small businesses and NGOs. And so I think this partnership is really interesting with being able to tap into this this ever-growing, as we're discovering through TerraMatch, this ever-growing network and pipeline of projects and project developers from around the world, being able to aggregate these and package these into ticket sizes and projects that are actually interesting to investors, and then using this this innovative sort of investment model to bring together, not have only the donation or the donor community being involved in this space, but being able to leverage and bringing in investors in here. And I think Venkat did allude to this, and I think we're speaking of this a little bit later, talking more about the metrics and the benefit, measuring these benefits. But WRI is hoping to bring to bear in this relationship as well a lot of advancements in technology in terms of remote sensing and tracking. So it's not just counting the trees that have been put in the ground, or I should say just planting trees, but really growing forests. And how do we track these projects over the long term to really see the maximum benefits?
Can I just build on that a little bit, Diana? So a couple things that were, I think, really important with what Aaron had just discussed. So one is the portfolio of quality partners exists. What they need from us and from you all is, again, the long-term commitments of resources and capital and some level of surety that these multi-year commitments are actually going to be available when we need them. So we're trying to move from kind of project by project, year to year, matching opportunity with donor interest, kind of just in time to get those payments out the door, get the trees in the ground, and get these projects off the ground. I mean, we're doing it successfully, but we are definitely seeing the need to have some level of capital, some level of surety, so that we can start to be thinking 3, 5, 10 years out. What is it going to take for this network of high quality partners, some big, some small, to take this to the next level. And they're not going to be able to do it on their own. They're going to need support. And groups like us and WRI and many other conservation partners who are doing amazing work around the globe are all going to need to kind of step up our game and make those long-term commitments to the on-the-ground partners to deliver these results. So I think initially there's going to be, while we're working with hundreds of partners and hundreds of projects around the world, for this type of investment opportunity, I think we're going to start with kind of the ones that are showing, you know, the most promise, the ones that we have the long-standing relationships with, the ones who have demonstrated year after year the ability to deliver the work that we, in a way that we expect. So we're going to make some long-term commitments to those partnerships and those relationships to build their capacity, to increase their ability to collect seed, develop their nurseries so that the seed stock is there, the seedlings are there, the trees are there, you know, a couple years out. So we know that we can scale from a few 100,000 to 1 million to tens of millions because the demand is there. We're seeing it right now. And we want to step up and realize that opportunity in collaboration with all of you.
I think if I can, sorry, just to build on that, Bill, thanks for bringing that around. I would say through all of our engagement with local project developers to really understand sort of what the challenges are, it's not just money. It's, as you said, it's that consistent funding. I mean, you wouldn't expect a for-profit business to be able to grow and have a growth plan for the next 5 or 10 years if it didn't have a consistent revenue stream or projected income coming through. If every year it's basically just like running by its bootstraps, you can't expect it to do that. And I think that's what we see and has sort of been like the expectations within this nonprofit sector. It's, as you said, it's last minute. It's like the trees need to go in the ground like next month and we're short, you know, $20,000. And it's like, oh, here's that check. That really makes it difficult for project developers. We've been hearing from them time and again to expand their nurseries, to bring on additional staff. They can't bring these folks on not knowing that in a couple months they're gonna have to let them go. And I think having that, even if it's, even just extending that to a very short time horizon of 3 years, would allow these local groups to, you know, in some cases 2-3 times scale up what they're doing. And I saw some of the questions come through about why I see the need for lots of these smaller players. Is from the realities on the ground, the larger players can do, I think they're most suited to maybe those, the work in these, what we would call more like ecological restoration, maybe working within national parks or these bigger ecosystems. But from our mapping work that WRI has done with partners of the restoration potential globally, it's huge potential. So I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 billion hectares. It's roughly twice the size of China or twice the size of the land area of the United States. It's massive. But if you break that down to see what that restoration looks like, the vast majority of this in terms of land area is not ecological restoration, restoring this back to a natural state, but it's integrating trees into landscapes where people are and will continue to be a part of that landscape. So these are working landscapes. So we're talking about agroforestry systems or protections along rivers, et cetera. And these are very complex, but these are the areas that realize the biggest benefits, not just for the climate, but really all of those socioeconomic benefits that are incredibly key. And it's in these areas where large international groups don't do as well as the local groups that really know, are embedded with the community, have that trust and know what to do. And we've seen this all across the world, especially from some of our colleagues in Western Africa. Just the reality of this is the only way we're going to achieve this is by bringing these hundreds or thousands of different groups into the tent and working together. It's not going to be a dozen big groups with a silver bullet. It's just the reality.
Yeah, Thank you, Erin, for talking about that. And the other thing I'll layer onto that is that you really can't do this work without working with the local communities. They're vital, and sometimes they're small. And as Erin is saying, we have these agroforestry systems, but what you're also doing when you're investing in these communities is you're actually preventing future deforestation, right? Because if you're implementing these sustainable agroforestry systems, there's more permaculture involved, there's all of these benefits, then that actually helps with the surrounding conservation of the landscape as well. And then you're also doing a lot of these micro type projects, which are really interesting. And that's where the storytelling kind of gets into it. So you may have 1,000 trees here, 3,000 trees there, but when you put it all together, the impact is vast and intensely diverse. And I'll also add, just because I'm a comms person, you know, it's a chicken egg thing, right? So if you have a partner that is able to plant 20,000 trees, how do you take them to being able to plant 500,000 trees? That's where that upfront capital is really vital. So we have many projects actually where we're helping to build nurseries, right? Because where do you come up with 500,000 seedlings? You need to cultivate those in the long term. So that's where all of these kind of details come into play. And that's where One Tree Planted is managing. We have an amazing team, and with TerraMatch and WRI, those are some of the day-to-day operations that happen. So let's turn it back over to the metrics. I see a couple of questions here in terms of the mechanics, Lindsay. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at a couple of those questions, but we are moving on to kind of what are those metrics? What are those details? That's where the shovel hits the soil, so to speak. I love my tree puns wherever I could get them. So I'll leave it over to you, Lindsay, if you've had a chance to look at a couple of these questions in terms of clarifying the cash flow or diving deeper into, well, what are those metrics exactly?
Sure. So maybe I'll just answer a couple of these technical questions quickly. One question was, is this similar to development impact bonds? And the answer is yes, but there are a couple of key differences. The first is that the donation capital is not backed by a government. It's actually donations that are pooled from foundations and from individuals who want to donate and want a tax deductible donation. And then the other is that this is actually, I don't want to get too much of the mechanics here, but it's an impact security, which is a performance-based debt security. And so it actually acts a little bit more like a bond than an actual development impact bond does. And it's standardized, it's scalable, and it's investor friendly. So I think the two kind of key differences is that actually it's sort of more scalable and also kind of can be executed faster. Another just quick thing on the kind of technical nature of this, there's a question around sort of the cash flows. So the investors provide the upfront capital with the expectation that there will be a repayment of principal with the potential of a return, but it is not principal protected. So that's the expectation that investors go into. And then the donors who are part of the donor vehicle are making a tax deductible donation. So their money is being donated to, in my example, One Tree Planted. So just to kind of clarify those two things. But Diana, to turn over to your question on metrics. So this whole model works by having metrics that are transparent and that actually sort of trigger this whole funding flow. And I maybe will turn over to my colleagues to get into like specifics around some metrics that they are tracking. But I would say from a kind of financing mechanism, there's a few key things you'd need to have in order to really allow this model to work, which lends itself well to climate solutions. The first is the metric needs to be, metrics needs to be quantifiable. It needs to be something that can be kind of counted essentially. The second is that it needs to be somewhat controllable. So the organization who's executing this needs to have some control over the ability to achieve those metrics. It needs to be proximate. So proximate to the ultimate outcomes we're trying to achieve. We know that many of the ultimate outcomes are 10, 20, 30 years out. But can we indicate that there's the metrics we're looking at have proximity to actually achieving the ultimate outcomes? And then there's a level of predictability. So can we assume that the metrics we are setting are predictive of these ultimate outcomes? And lastly, it needs to be time bound. Typically 5-year range is what we are working on And that's in part driven by the investors who typically want to see return within 5 years. So those are sort of the things we think about when it comes to the framework and the metrics for the results-based financing, which maybe I'll turn it over to the team to talk through sort of how they would think about applying this within their own frameworks of what they're capturing or sort of what they're seeing captured.
Anyone want to jump in first on that one?
If I can, I just would say here from some of our other work on this and sort of like the monitoring and identifying what those metrics or indicators should be is, I think you really need to start. So we have a publication. It's not as tailored towards the project level, but I think the methodology and the thought process is still relevant here. It's called The Road to Restoration. I think we can share a link to that with folks later. But the idea here is to come at the problem, not with the metric in mind, but what is your end goal? Like, what are you hoping to achieve through the project? Are you really interested in addressing, is it climate or is it water? Is it, livelihoods and income? And trying to identify that larger theme or goal. And then from there, working backwards to identify what is that, metric or indicator that would sort of give you an indication that you are hitting success for those. I would also say to be careful not to do too much. I think there's a misconception that if you monitor 100 different things, then you're doing a great job. And if you can do 200, you're doing even better. But the reality is you hit a level where collecting that much data then becomes too expensive or too complicated, and you end up then not measuring anything. And we've seen this time and again where national systems set up, indicator frameworks with 250 different indicators, and then the system never gets off the ground. We would really recommend, especially at the project level, is really hone down into what are your core interests and try to pick that, 2, 3, maybe 4 like main indicators that you want to track, and do those well, and do those for the long term. I think what we need to remember too with restoration and reforestation, this is a long-term investment, right? It's not like we do this and then next year we might be able to see some results, but a lot of the impacts, especially the big impacts that we talk about through restoration and reforestation, we're talking about, time horizons of, 5 years, 10 years, in some cases we start getting into the decades. And so finding what are those impacts that you want to track and have a pretty cost-effective and consistent way of measuring that for the long term, because then you'll really be able to speak to the impact of your project. So just my 2 cents here.
Yeah, I can build on that a little bit. So thanks, Aaron. I mean, and we really look to WRI and other global partners to kind of, set those standards and set those bars for us. But we're also doing, our own work, consistently aligned with where we think a lot of these global standards are going. So there's again, the time horizons I think is important. So if we're talking about, tree planting or, forest restoration or assisted natural regeneration, you're starting at a scale where it's really hard to use some of the technology and the remote sensing that I think we heard from some other panelists earlier in the conference. So there is some incredible technology and emerging opportunities to do large scale forest restoration, forest conservation monitoring. The challenge with the work that we do is, the first few years, the first 1 to 3 years or so, it's really hard to see, the results of, a tree planting project from satellite imagery. So you can start to pick that up in year 3, 4, 5, and beyond. So we're having to use different approaches in those, first few years. So obviously we're tracking the number of trees planted, the survival rates of those trees, the acres restored. But ultimately it's the planting the tree is just the first step, right? That's not the only outcome that we're seeking. It's the beginning of a forest restoration and healthy forest journey, which is going to take, years to decades. But I think there are some, proven metrics that we can rely on that can be indicators for long-term success. So if trees survive past that kind of 3-year period, if conditions are favorable, more than likely those trees are going to grow up and become part of a healthy forest. And that these projects are not one-off projects. These projects that we're talking about are, multi-year, multi-decade, large-scale forest restoration projects that have been going on for a long time. And these community groups and partners that we're working with are in this for the long haul because that's what's needed. And what we're talking about is adding additional capacity, additional support, additional capital to just continue to build on the awesome work that's already happening on the ground and provide them with some level of surety and support that they can continue that work and scale that work into the future.
And Bill, actually, there's a good question here that I hear all the time. What is the process to consider new projects? So maybe you can just build on that and the WRI team of what we look for when assessing.
Yep. Yeah, so the TerraMatch platform is one platform that we work with WRI on, but we also have our own internal platform and portal for finding new projects and scaling existing partnerships. So I think the other thing that's important is that we're talking about here is reducing risk and having a higher level of confidence in making these kind of investments in these projects on the ground. And the approach that we take is we have a vetting process. So projects come in to us either through TerraMatch or our own platform from different partners that we may be already working with to scale, or new partners who are looking to do work in this space and are looking for some support from us. So we have a team of 11 project managers who do this work full time. They're geographically distributed across the globe. So we have on the ground presence in different regions. So we develop relationships. We have a thorough vetting process that we go through to ensure that, one, the partnership is solid and strong or has good potential, and the projects that they're proposing are appropriate given the outcomes. Like Aaron said, what are the outcomes of these projects, and then make sure that the projects are designed and implemented with those objectives in mind. So it goes through a pretty rigorous process. Every project is reviewed, approved, and direct and connected to support, so that those partners know the financial commitments are going to be there to move forward with those projects. The other thing I'll say about the projects is that because these are large scale, multi-year, multi-decadal projects, there's other sources of funding and capital that are being brought to the table here. And we're looking to leverage those sources of funding and kind of co-finance or co-blend some financing to make sure that these projects have the resources that they need to be successful over the long term. So we're very explicit about that and very clear in our relationships with our partners. We can claim the tree, and we're clear about the budgets and all the other folks that are involved in these projects. So we understand how we're all going to work together successfully to make these projects happen, because none of this work happens, individuals and organizations working on their own. We're all working in partnership with each other to be successful here. And we're just talking about growing and expanding on that partnership-driven model.
Mm-hmm. So we're running low on time, but I did want to give Venkat and Aaron a chance to say a little bit more on that vetting process. Anything to add there?
I have a separate comment on the metrics, but maybe I can say that after. Aaron, you have anything to add on the project selection?
I'll just be very, very brief because of time, but we do have, please reach out to us at, it's terramatch@wri.org, or you can find me on the, within the session. And I'm happy to share, we have documentation that goes through what we look at when we do our vetting process, both for the organization and the project. So I don't want to take too much time here, but please reach out. It's terramatch@wri.org. And Venkat, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this kind of ties into the earlier questions on picking larger, more homogeneous monoculture plantations for restoration versus the smallholder enterprises that we work with. And I would just say, in general, the smallholder landowners and the small scale projects that we work with traditionally have more biodiverse, rich, friendly trees that are better for the landscape. It's a more integrated landscape approach. I would also say conservation is about communities. This goes to the metrics portion that Lindsay was talking about. There's not just landscape metrics here, there's social community impact metrics. And I mean, not to throw out an uncomfortable statistic, but 5 white people in the United States own more land than every single African-American combined. I mean, there's 15% of the United States population is African-Americans, and 5 white guys basically own more land than all of them combined, and it's not close. So I think that restoration is not just about, carbon sequestration and all of that. It's about giving opportunity to a lot of people that don't have it. So absolutely, there's money to be made. It's a forestry investment summit. I think we can do it in a way that is appealing to a lot of different audiences. But at the same time, the metrics go beyond landscapes. It goes helping communities. I would argue personally, having spent a lot of time in the field, that giving a lot of money to a large corporation doing large scale restoration, the majority of that money will not trickle down potentially to the people that actually require it, down the people who are actually doing the work, the planting. So from our side, there are two sides to the coin. I think you can do both. And I think with our approach, at least if you can scale it, you can absolutely do both. But you have to realize that if you really truly want to make a difference, then we really have to engage the communities on the ground. It's a global effort and it's a local effort as well.
And just that's perfect segue. I mean, just to follow on that, I think if we want to see these projects be successful for the long term, so talking about this being permanent projects, you know, decade-old, century-long projects, you need that community buy-in. Like this needs to be an effort of theirs that they see value in, and it's a part of sort of their landscape, and not just an outside force coming in and doing something and leaving. We've seen time and again that fails. A couple of years later, trees get taken down because there isn't sort of that interest. And so I think what Venkat says, like, you need to see these. The social side of this, I would say, is even more important. And I'd see almost the carbon as like the happy sort of like secondary byproduct of this. But like the real value in these restoration projects is really the social and local environmental impact here. We know that for every $1 invested in restoration, we can expect to see anywhere from $7 to $30 in economic benefits for communities. And so there's a huge social aspect of this. And I think if we focus solely on carbon, we do exactly what Venkat says. We could end up with a planet full of tree plantations, which would get you to the carbon side, but would have no biodiversity and really not hit any of those other benefits. So it behooves us to find a more holistic approach in terms of the impacts that we're hoping to get.
Yeah, Aaron, just real quick, I think that's really key that we're talking about this being one part of a global solution, right? Planting trees is impactful, but it's not the only solution out there, right? We need to protect forests, we need to conserve forests, we need to assist the recovery of forests, and we need to plant new forests where nature just needs a little extra helping hand. So we're really focusing this work on the highest priority areas. We know it's not the only solution, but we are excited about the opportunity to work in partnership with all of you and many others to do this critically important global work that needs to be moving forward much more quickly and helping you translate your interest into action now.
Absolutely. Well said, you guys. So we have 3 minutes left, just keeping an eye on time. I see some of the questions, but I believe we actually addressed most of these questions, but I would invite those of us that are available on the panel to come to the lounge. When Tree Planted has a table in the lounge. So anyone listening in these sessions, if you have any lingering questions, please join us there. Find us. We are happy to connect with you one-on-one and address all of this. So with 3 minutes left to go, always good to end on a really positive note. So we got 2 minutes now. So just really briefly, maybe 30 seconds or so, just ending on what are we looking forward to? What is something that is on the horizon? What is something really exciting and energizing in this space that we're looking forward to? Let's start with Lindsay.
Yeah, there's, I think, roughly 715 billion in impact investments that get applied each year, and over trillions that are on the sidelines. And I think with increased transparency, increased focus on metrics, and increased alignment around outcomes, we can actually start to see and channel a lot more funding towards climate solutions that will accelerate the rate and pace with which we are able to achieve some of the gains that we need to start seeing. So I'm optimistic about the funding finding the impact in the near term.
Thanks, Lindsay. Bill, what about you?
Yeah, I'm excited and encouraged to see several hundred people take 2 days out of their incredibly busy schedules to be part of this important conversation. So we're available. We'd love to follow up with you all after the conference and again, help translate some of your goals and your intentions into action.
Thanks, Bill. Aaron?
Yeah, I think I just get excited with all the work that we've been doing with TerraMetch and Land Accelerator, just seeing all of these, again, these smaller entrepreneurs and NGOs out there doing the real work. These are the real heroes. These are the ones that are going to get us to that that green sustainable future. And it's just so amazing to see these groups. I get to see them every single day, new applications on TerraMatch coming in. And it's just so heartwarming to see that, like, despite everything you see in the news, everything doom and gloom, there's an army of folks out there that might be invisible to the rest of the world, but doing the real work, and they keep doing it, and on shoestring budgets. And yeah, it's heartwarming, and it gives me hope that if we can connect these folks with the right people, we can achieve this.
Thank you, Aaron. And time's up for us. So Venkat, come share your optimism in the lounge with us, and we'll be there to answer any other questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.